the main thrust of him interacting with the Jews and interacting with the Pharisees, interacting with the whole establishment of Judaism that was in Jerusalem. And lo and behold, we see the pattern unfolding again, that he's going to find himself at odds with them. Or rather, they're going to find themselves at odds with God. And what we have this morning is following John's pattern. And it's wonderful, and it's incredibly helpful, because it helps people who are simple as I am to be able to see what he's getting at. Again, John wrote all of his gospel for an express purpose. I put down these things. They happened. They were actual. They were factual. They were historical. But I highlighted certain things, and I edited my account to bring you to a certain conclusion. And if you don't reach that conclusion, you at least have to face it. You at least have to take it or leave it. And so, what we have unfolding for us this morning is Jesus performing another miracle. It was a historical miracle. This man real. He existed. His infirmity was real. That all happened. But as John writes in the way that he writes using signs. So he has things that occur in the Gospel of John that they were real, true, actual, factual, verifiable miracles. But the actual nature of them gives way for Christ to explain what they were and what they meant and how they are illustrations. But secondly, they help us to see what it is when Christ is in action. What it is when someone encounters Christ. What it means to come to know him. What it means to believe upon him. And that's what we see unfolding throughout this whole gospel. We see these actual historical things that he did. The feeding of the 5,000. The healing of the man by the pool of Bethesda. And then we have, after following it, Jesus' own words, explaining, I did this physical miracle, but it's also a sign that points to my identity. Well, this morning we're going to continue on just through verse 12, because, as Rod pointed out, there are other pressing national matters to attend to this afternoon. So, we'll cut it off at verse 12. So let's begin. John chapter 9, verse 1. Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Jesus answered, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Verse 6, And when he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. And he said to him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed, and came back seeing. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore, verse 10, they said to him, How were your eyes opened? He answered and said, A man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes, and said to me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and I received sight. Then they said to him, Where is he? He said, I do not know. So once again, we encounter someone who has some condition, some infirmity, some besetting condition, that ultimately the fact that they're in it when Jesus encounters them points to the fact that they were powerless to do anything about it. It also most likely points to the fact that others around him, whether benevolent or malevolent, either they were willing to help and volunteer or extract everything of worth from him, were unable to resolve the issue either. And that's the character that Jesus is going to deal with this morning. Jesus, as he does in all of his ways, goes about dealing with the man in such a way that requires faith, but that brings about a change that highlights the fact that Jesus was involved. So you have to remember that as we go on. Basically 4 words that I want to group everything under, and they all fall chronologically. The first section is this. It has to do with the man's condition. The next section would be Jesus' intervention. Then there would be the man's participation, and finally the people's apprehension. The first section is the man's condition, and it's verses 1 through 3. And I want to make a quick note here regarding verse 3, 4, and 5. I don't know if you like to write in your Bibles. I don't know if you have some type of prohibition to that, but I encourage you to do it. Because the way that this particular these verses come across in my Bible, I don't necessarily agree with them. And this was brought to light by reading someone else this week who pointed out that a better flow for them would probably be this. In my particular translation, it says, neither this man nor his parents sinned, comma, but the works of God should be revealed in him. End sentence. Verse 4, I must work the works of him who sent me while it's day, comma, the night is coming when no one can work. A better translation would probably be this. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. Full stop. Jesus makes a statement to his disciples. Next, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of my Father. So just keep that in mind as we go through. But all of these verses right here in this first part have to do with the man's condition. And the man's condition was this. He was blind from birth. Now, just as we had back with the man at the pool of Bethesda, we don't know how Jesus knows this. John includes it here as a detail, but the way that Jesus is dealing with him and the way the disciples are asking questions, there was something about him that said, I've been blind since birth. As we talked about the man at the pool of Bethesda, maybe he had that certain spot, and it said that he'd been there a long time. Maybe he had his exact spot, and you could see the outline of dust that was around his particular bed. And, this is a little sign posted up, so this is Carl's spot. All others will be towed. But in this particular man's condition, he had something that testified to him. It's unlikely that they knew him because they were from Galilee, and here they are in Judea. But there was something about him, perhaps even a sign, perhaps even something there that indicated, I'm in need. And how they encounter him is in a position of need. As it goes on to describe him later on, he's one who begs, he's one who depends on the kindness of others through alms for his sustenance. That is how he got by. That is how he went about. And so the discussion between the disciples comes up, which is this. He's in the condition. He's been born blind. It's been a whole lifelong thing. But the origin of it is the real problem for the disciples. And they say, so was it he who sinned? Or was it his parents who sinned? And they're trying to engage Jesus in a theological discussion. They're kind of moving to the head of the class, wanting to ask him, let's talk about this. How did this happen? And it's interesting that Jesus' response is, as it always is, yes, boys, let's sit down and have a theological discussion within earshot of the man who's been born blind about his blindness. He doesn't even go there. He says, boys, it doesn't matter, does it? The man's blind, and I'm here. What do you think should happen next? Do you want to sit down and have a little discussion about the origin of sin and all of these things? Or do you want to witness me encounter someone who is not whole, who is not complete, who is not as he should be? So Jesus doesn't even enter the discussion with him, and he goes about simply doing the work, as he says there in the next part. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. It's not some discussion, and if you ever find yourself involved with someone who wants to make a long, drawn-out doctrine over that regarding original sin or any of those other things, that's not the place to do it. Jesus is stopping it right there. He's saying, boys, does it matter? Does it really matter? And that's the condition that Christ encounters everyone in their life. He doesn't come in and say, let's have a lengthy discussion, let's review your resume, let's go back through all the details as to how you found yourself in this sorry state. Either it had to be your parents or it had to be you. He says, no, you are. Exactly what he said to the man at the pool of Bethesda. Do you want to be made well? Didn't go into how you got here, didn't go into the result of the partying, didn't go into anything. He simply, here I am. Here you are. What do you want to do about it? Should I sit and discuss it with my boys for a while, or do you guys want to see me go to work? And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents? And he was born blind. Jesus answered, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. So the first part was the man's condition. It was obvious. It was apparent. It was a condition of need. It was a condition of dependence on others. It was a condition of vulnerability. And here's Christ intervening. This is this man's condition before, every day before in the course of his life. And here's the one day where Jesus encounters him. Now, look what happens. Jesus presents to him, at best, a far-fetched consideration. He explains to his disciples what he's going to do. He explains to them that it's not about the discussion of how it came about, but that I am going to be directly involved in the reversal of it. And he went about at work in the man's life in verse 6. When he had said these things, he spat on the ground and made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay. There's nothing in these opening verses that explains the only word, if you have to imagine for a moment, if you would close your eyes, the only senses by which this man has to go off of as this little scene is unfolding before him are the words that are being spoken. He'd probably heard the first part before. He'd probably had, you have to think in proximity to the temple, who knows, maybe the rabbis had led their children out and in the midst of teaching had walked by this man before and held this discussion right in front of him like a resident, making their rounds in the hospital and saying, well, here's this man born blind and let's have a discussion about him. Let's go on to all these things. And then the next part that unfolds is Jesus actually doing something about it, which had never happened before. He heard the part, the discussion, the points, the arguments, the doctrines, and then they moved on. But there's nothing here in what Jesus says to the guy or what this man overhears that he's led to believe that this is any different person. There's nothing in these verses that says, the Son of God saith to thee. Jesus' own disciples refer to him not as Jesus, Messiah, Christ, Lord forever. They say, Rabbi, this man is blind. He doesn't know what's unfolding before him. And so he sits there, and as Christ begins to work, and Christ begins to do what he's doing, there's no reason for this man, there's nothing other than the touch of Christ, than the actual tone of Christ and the presence of Christ. There's nothing else advertising that Christ is unique. There's no banner. There's no nothing. This man was not in touch with all of the things that had been happening. He doesn't even refer to him as being the Messiah or any of these things. There's just interaction. There's just Christ making clay, and make note of that because that is what's going to get the ire of the Pharisees. That was prohibited to do on the Sabbath. But he makes clay. He just spits on the ground and starts making little mud cakes. And as the man's sitting there, in his blindness, certainly more acute to sounds and to gestures and to proximity than anyone else would be, notices the hands of Christ coming close, touching his eyes. And it's interesting that John uses the word that he anoints his eyes. He doesn't say he just presses it on there. He says he anoints his eyes. And that's the limit of this man's interaction with Christ. Now, what is it about, again, as we see in the Gospel of John, what is it about Christ that is just so absolutely unique? Remember that the soldiers are sent out to arrest him. And they came back and they said to the guys who sent them out, they said, no one ever spoke as this man spoke before. No one ever spoke as this man spoke before. We are being derelict of duty right now because we got up there and we were within arm's length of grabbing the guy and we were arrested and we stopped and we turned back and we've been discussing it ever since we left to come back and what kind of explanation are we going to give you. And it's simply this: no man ever spoke as this man. So I'm amazed as Christ interacts with this man that this man has no idea. Later on he'll refer to him as you'll see in verse 11. What happened? A man called Jesus. There's no pomp, circumstance. And that's what all of this hinges on as we go forward. The man wasn't caught up in some type of messianic fairy tale. What it comes down to for this man is, I was blind and now I see. There's no joining of a band. There's no coming together of, and that's not a band. There's no coming and joining some type of movement. The man was personal in his affliction, and he was personal in his interaction with Christ, and he'll be personal in his change. But it's amazing that as Christ speaks to him, he just has this presence, and he has this authority, and he has this unique character that communicates to the man, when I tell you to go and wash in the pool of Siloam, that's all that he says. But it's the undergirding, and it's the tone, and it's the veracity in which he says it that the man actually gets up and goes. Now think about that for the man. The man was blind, navigating a large, busy city. He wasn't going to most likely be able to do it alone. His whole life probably was routine. He probably had marked out every little nook and cranny of wall and what have you to get from his home to his usual spot. And here Christ comes and he's anointed his eyes. And if anything, he's just made it worse because, before I couldn't see, now I've got mud and dirt on my eyes. And Christ says to him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam. Which Sean says was sent, and he goes. But that wasn't just getting up and hopping. Take again into account the man's infirmity. He couldn't see. So he either had to have someone assist him and walk him to that pool, in which case it would be, where are you going? I need to go to the pool of Siloam and wash my eyes out. Well, to get there, we're going to have to walk across the courtyard. We're going to have to go down the stairs. Do you want to just go to... No. The guy said, go wash in the pool of Siloam. So that's where we're going. Okay. In any event, this wasn't just some type of simple and easy and meaningless task. The man was going to have to exert some effort to do it. And that's a great encouragement to us as well. As we're looking at this in the interaction, the words of Christ are there. They are plain. The activity that needs to happen afterwards is simple, but it doesn't mean that the effort he exerted was minimal. Keep that in mind as we go through our days, and because undoubtedly as we walk with the Lord, for any amount of time, there will be the seasons where it is cold and it is dry and there is nothing, and the words are sitting there very plain, and it's incumbent upon us to get up and to go and to walk. To get up and to go and to make our way into what Christ said. To do it. So now we're into the man's participation. And I have to wonder about this man being in somewhat proximity to the temple. You know, how many times, and it's just a guess and it's a gesture, we don't know how old the man was, but it's pure speculation, but why not? I can't help but think that there had to have been at least once or twice some young buck making his way back from the temple, perhaps at feast or festival time, having just heard a teaching on Elisha, walking by, seeing the man and saying, this is it, this is my opportunity, I'm going to make it happen, and started doing all kinds of things to the poor guy. Started jostling him, started trying to get him to do all things, and trying to make up his own ideas of what should happen and how this guy should get healed and all of those types of things. And the man's defenseless to sit there. I think it's a perfectly valid speculation that all types of people had managed to do all types of things for this man. As we're going to see, he's identified by his neighbors and the ones around him. Isn't this the one who begged? That's how they recognize him. The way that it's written, it says he could be blind or he could be begging. But the way that they identify him is, this is the one who begged. Isn't this the one who was dependent on us? Isn't this the one that after I went in and I got my morning coffee and I made my way on my way, I always made sure to drop him 50 cents? Isn't this that man? But that's how I identified him. So from this man's perspective, his participation, why would he have anything to go on? Why would he partake in what this guy told him to do? Why would he actually get up and go and wash all the way to the pool of Siloam? Don't get me wrong, he has mud on his face. He probably wants to get that off. But why would he hold to it? And when the offers came and the suggestion was, just wash it off. Here's a cloth. No. He said wash, but he said pool of Siloam. And I'm going to see that through. But as we have from other gospel accounts, as I've said before, Jesus is always encountering those people who they've spent it all. They weren't coming to Christ because this was the first step. We'll see what Jesus has to say, and then I'll go look up the other guys. Then I'll get a second opinion. No, we always see Jesus encountering people who are just flat out of options. We always see Jesus encountering people who, whether they realize it or not, have actually gone through all of the other available means. And when do you think those means dropped off for the community of this man? Don't you think when he was a toddler, his parents might have tried various things and thought that if they would just do this for him or that for him. And at a certain point, the whole existence of the man, all of his community, all of his family, even himself, just came to a place of resignation. It is what it is. Born blind, I'm just going to be blind. So no amount of intervention from anyone had done anything to change that. But yet, when Christ speaks to him, not coming to him, declaring himself, I am the son of Daniel, the son of God, and all of the other messianic titles you want to give, he's just there and he's just putting the mud on the man's eyes. And he says, now go wash in the pool of Siloam. What authority came through his voice. So the man goes. Verse 7, and he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed, and came back seeing. This man, who everything was processed by sound, by touch, by proximity, by description of others, which would have been almost worthless, because how do you describe anything in that manner? The rose is red. Well, what is red? Blind from birth. He had no reference point. He had no catalog to which to draw on. He had no library of it looks like a... There was none of that. It was from complete and total darkness and blindness to complete and total availability to see. He went, he washed, and he received sight. And he came back seeing. He came back seeing it. And I have to think that at least a couple steps along the way back, he might have gotten disoriented and had to close his eyes and listen for a moment. As people came towards him, he would look at their face and be so overwhelmed by the fact that he was looking at them for the first time that he had to stop and listen to their voice. And, Carl, this man's entire life had just been changed. And it was real. Again, actual physical miracle. But as we go on in the coming weeks, John records it as a sign. This is what Jesus did physically, but it speaks to what he does spiritually. So, such a miraculous thing happening, and John sums it up in one simple verse. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. And it is wonderful that he came back. 8. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is not this he who sat and begged? Is this not he who sat and begged? Obviously he was behaving in such a way and acting in such a way they could tell that things were absolutely different. He was maybe up walking around and people dashed out of their houses saying, oh no, John got up again, he's going to bump into something, or you didn't see the guy with the ladder, what have you, running to intervene, and he turns around and it's totally different. What had happened in the man's life wasn't a trick. It wasn't something that the man himself could manufacture. It wasn't something that he even aspired to. He had come to the place of resignation. I'm born blind, I'm going to be blind my entire life. And now he's behaving in a completely different manner. By his actions, by his words, by his interactions, by the things that he was doing, by his mannerisms, by all of this, it created a very large problem for the people. And that's why I say it's the people's apprehension. They're puzzled. And again, their identification of him is not, was this the man who was born blind? Isn't this the one who begged? Isn't this one who was previously dependent on us all? Isn't this the one who, I don't mean to say it begrudgingly, but for 12 years I've been the one to escort him from there, back to home at the end of the day. And he can see. I've verified it. I've been around this man for a very long time. And if there was any kind of trick going on, or if he was just scamming or anything like that, I would have known. But isn't this he? There's questions. Therefore the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, Is this not he who sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. And why is there a problem? It doesn't say the man had gotten a haircut. It doesn't say that he had changed the way he dressed. The main problem was this. Year after year, after decade, we've seen this guy, same spot, same time, unable to see, unable to do these things, and all of that fits. The look, the whole thing fits. I get the face. But the difference is that he sees now. It's incredible. And by incredible, let's go back to the actual meaning of the word. It lacks credibility. It's amazing. And we've abused all these words. They don't really mean what they're supposed to mean. It's awesome. It's unthinkable. And these guys have a real problem on their hand, and it's wonderful. And it has to come from the man's own lips. The guy who was begging, who sat out front there, always asking alms at this time and in that place and all these ways. Yes, I am he. Same man. Different condition. He was found to be totally out of context. And his own testimony settles it. And naturally their question is, how did this happen? How did this happen? How did something of this scale and of this magnitude occur? You would think that there would be something following that. That would be wonderful. and it would be grandiose, and it would be enlarged. 10. Therefore he said to them, how were your eyes opened? He answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes, and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And they waited with bated breath. And? Okay, hold on. He's pausing for effect. You, man who was born blind, who have known you your whole life, who's begged outside our door for 2 decades now, explain to us how this happened. A man named Jesus made clay? What kind of clay? Clay. And anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. Oh, the pool of Siloam, that must be the key. All of these points and all of these things that people would no doubt try to extract from him and try to make it about, and he's simply saying, a man called Jesus, and there was no doubt whispers there, Jesus, oh, the guy who was starting the thing at the temple the other day and what was happening. But for this man, he's just saying, a man named Jesus, this does not launch off into all of the things if he were trying to pretend to be a disciple and say, oh, the most high, magnificent Son of God in glory, and all of the other old English terms that you might throw in. He says, this guy named Jesus came by, put mud on my eyes, and then he told me to go wash in the pool of Siloam. I went and washed. I came back and I received sight. And that's it. I did what he said. It took me a while to get down there and back, but I did what he said. And again, everything focuses on Christ. And they said to him, where is he? He said, I do not know. Here's the condition of the man. In the period of 12 verses, he has gone from being entirely dependent on others. Entirely dependent on the mercy of man. Entirely dependent that others would be kind and benevolent to him. Entirely dependent for most things. And this is so wonderful that John records this, because it's something that we can easily identify with. All of us being able-bodied. Make your way through your house today with your eyes closed and shoes on. But this is exactly the man's condition. Previously entirely dependent upon everyone, without resource, without recourse. Not a man of ability, not a man of anything that anyone else would value. And it's the one that Christ encounters. And Christ makes no discussion as to the man's previous arrival at that condition, but just goes about working. Again, real miracle, factual miracle, amazing thing that, as always happens with God, is summed up in words that cause you to wonder even more. And yet it's the picture of what he does with every soul. It's the picture of how he encounters every person. Blind. Entirely dependent upon everyone for what they think, for what they do, for resources, for abilities. And in something simple that requires effort and faith, provides the man with the only change that he'll ever know in his condition. Go and wash. Go to the pool. Come back seeing. And he says it with authority. And he says it in that way that only Christ can. And the man participates. The man follows through to the apprehension of people, to the curious onlooking of people, to the questioning of people, to wonder, how did this happen? And that's always the reply. This man named Jesus. This man named Jesus. But there would be no arguing with it. That's him there this morning. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for sending forth your Son. We might know him. Father, I thank you so much for the way that you have made salvation. because it is foolishness. It just, by all of the world's standards, it makes no sense. For all of this world's ills and for all of the troubles that come, your answer, Father, is Christ and Him crucified. And to all of this world, that is utter foolishness. But to those of us who are being saved, it's life. Thank you, Father, for the way that you work, to the glory of your Son.